Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of August the 16th and 17th, 2025. And as always, I'm going to be looking at the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend. And as well, I want to consider the horoscope of Prince Andrew. Now, I do sometimes get criticism for looking at royalty because, who cares about the royalty? I mean, I don't particularly care about the royalty. But, the advantage of members of a royal family like Prince Andrew is I don't have to explain. You know who they are. You know about their history. You know what people say about them. So it kind of makes things straightforward. Also, with Prince Andrew, a book has just come out about him by Andrew Lowney with the title of Entitled, The Rise and Fall of the House of York. And as far as I know, this book is a real hatchet job. It talks about Prince Andrew and essentially how awful he is, looking at the Epstein files, his personality, his sex life, and he generally comes over as an awful person. So, if we take this description of him at face value, this does raise the question, can you tell from someone's horoscope whether someone is an awful person? Now, you can look at Prince Andrew's horoscope with the benefit of hindsight and say, oh, well, he's got this and that, this makes sense. But if you'd never seen that chart before, would you have said that he would be so awful? I mean, assuming he is awful, I'm just taking the mainstream narrative. There's certainly a lot of evidence against him. And so that's my question. And I wanted to just look at his horoscope from that angle. And in the process of looking at his horoscope, one may have to look at other horoscopes, people who have perhaps contributed to his awfulness. For example, that might include his mother, Queen Elizabeth, or even his father, or perhaps his brother, or some of the people he met over the course of his adult life. So, that's what I want to look at the end of this video. But let's start by looking at the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend. And here is the chart of the weekend, set for midnight on Sunday the 17th. And so at midnight, Sunday the 17th, Sunday, New York time, the moon is in Gemini. So Sunday is a Gemini day. Now, as far as Saturday is concerned, at 1 minute past 5 in the afternoon, the moon moves into Gemini. So that means that if you're in Europe or Africa, then most of Saturday moon is in Taurus. Then late afternoon, early evening, the moon moves into Gemini. If you're in the Americas, then Saturday morning, the moon is in Taurus. If you're in California, it will leave Taurus and enter Gemini around sort of 9 in the morning, a bit earlier if you're in Hawaii or Alaska. So that's the moon. And as far as the main aspects this weekend, what really is important, there's no aspect that I regard as being of devastating significance. The week starts with the weekend starts with right at the beginning. We've got a last quarter. We've got a last quarter moon at the beginning of a weekend. So for many of us, we realise that the lunar cycle is coming to an end, and what are those last things that we need to sort out before we realise that it's too late. The moon is waning. It's coming to the end. There is a new moon coming up quite soon on is it the 23rd, something like that, 23rd of August, that new moon at 0 degrees Virgo. And, aside from that, well, moon moves into Gemini and it makes a number of sort of aspects. It makes a sextile to Saturn. It makes a conjunction to Uranus. Yes, you can see what happens when the moon. There's its moon moves through Gemini. There's its conjunction to Uranus. So it's not really very exciting this weekend. Perhaps you already gathered that from my sort of tone of voice. And if there's a non-lunar aspect to be thinking about, it's Sun biquintile Saturn on Sunday, and that doesn't sound great, does it? I mean, it's not a bad aspect. It's just perhaps sounds a bit tedious. But Sun biquintile Saturn does allow us to sort of get ourselves together. And biquintiles are about what we're trying to consciously create, and so as the weekend unfolds, there might be things that aren't right, that we want to sort out, what we want to organize. And with the Sun biquintile Saturn, that is something we can do. I mean, through our own efforts. And it might not be easy, but we kind of feel that it is the right thing to do. And so that's a picture set for New York. If we set the weekend for Sydney, Australia, then at midnight on Sunday, the moon is at 28 Taurus. So that's sort of nice and simple. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand, then Saturday, moon is in Taurus. Sunday, moon is in Gemini. That's fairly straightforward. And as far as a heliocentric picture, here it is, putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and where of course it should be. And Mars is making a square to Pluto. Mars in Scorpio making a square to Pluto in Aquarius. So that's one of the main heliocentric aspects. We've also got Venus making a conjunction to Uranus. So, Mars square Pluto, you could say that is about power and how we assert power. People are really sort of flexing their muscles, maybe not individuals, but maybe groups, organizations, governments. And of course, this all comes in the wake of Trump's meeting with Putin. So although this is a recording for the weekend, I'm making this recording on Friday morning. So the meeting with Putin hasn't taken place yet. So we don't know how it's going to work out. We can guess, but right now we really don't know. And Venus is making a sextile to Saturn, and it's making a conjunction to Uranus. So, that Saturn-Uranus sextile crops up again. And Saturn-Uranus sextile is about, trying to stabilize something that is difficult to stabilize, because you're talking about Uranus. Uranus is a revolutionary force, and Saturn is trying to get to grips with it. And Venus is trying to get to grips with it as well. Venus sextile Saturn conjunct Uranus. You're trying to deal with people in a certain way. You're trying to create a structure, but you're also aware that a huge change is afoot. And likewise, with Trump's meeting with Putin, it may just say something about the aftershocks and sort of what kind of changes are brought about as a result of this. And so we've got Earth sextile Chiron. So we've got quite a few sextiles. Earth sextile Chiron over the weekend. So it may be relatively easy to be individuals, to be ourselves. We don't have to be too self-conscious. We can be open. We can be honest about who we are. And, we might be afraid of fallout, getting criticism, but there's no need to be afraid. And, by being ourselves, we can have a fortunate influence, maybe even a healing influence. So now it's time to look at the astrology for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of August the 16th and 17th, 2025. Aries. as the weekend progresses, probably things start to get more interesting. As you hit the weekend, Saturday may start off on a relatively boring note. It doesn't feel as if a great deal is happening, and that's probably a good thing. I mean, is action always should action always be welcomed? And there may be things that you're trying to work out, you're trying to resolve, and the weekend does start with a last quarter moon, and so as you hit the weekend, you may just be aware that something needs to resolve, something perhaps is coming to an end, and you need to do something about it. And it may relate to something hanging over from earlier in the week, something you hadn't dealt with, and if you don't sort it out now, then you might miss your chance, or there may be just a misunderstanding that has not been resolved, or something is just up in the air, and it would be a good idea on Saturday to talk about it, to get it out of the way. And it might relate to money or something that just someone hasn't understood. But the moon changes sign, the moon moves into Gemini, and so with the moon moving into Gemini, Aries, I do think that things will get more interesting. Suddenly you've got something to get your teeth into. The weekend takes a new turn, and there may be more things you want to say, but you can say things which are interesting, and you can go to places that are interesting. So if you feel that it's important to visit someone or visit something with Moon in Gemini, then that is certainly something you can do. It should be fairly straightforward, and there shouldn't be much resistance, and you might learn something, and that's always important with the Moon in Gemini. That you shouldn't assume that you've got all the answers, and as you move into Sunday, the Moon is making a trine to Mars. So Moon trine Mars might say something about other people, what other people are doing, and how you relate to them, and their energy. And you can certainly pick up on other people's energy. And if you're in the Americas, it's not just Sunday; it's sort of late on Saturday as the moon makes this trine to Mars. And so don't think, Aries, that it's up to you to do everything, that you have to take all the initiatives. You don't, because there are people that have definite ideas, and if you give them a little bit of encouragement, then they'll take things further, and you might not have to do very much. Once you get things going, once things have started, but it just may take a bit of time. So if a weekend starts off being quite tedious, don't worry about it. I think that eventually things will pick up. Now, the main non-lunar aspect, possibly the only non-lunar aspect, is a biquintile between the Sun and Saturn. And this biquintile is possibly relevant to you. I mean, Saturn is in Aries, Sun is in Leo. And so, when you think about Sun and Saturn Sun in Leo, Saturn in Aries, you think of a trine. But here it's not a trine. It is a biquintile. And biquintile is about what you are trying to create, and what you are trying to organize, and what you are planning. And so if you have an idea that something can happen, and you are really sure of yourself, then you can make it happen. And it requires a very disciplined approach. So what you could be talking about is something that you're really very good at. It's a fundamental expression of your creativity and your talent, but it seems a bit vague. you're not quite sure where it's going. You're not quite sure how useful it is. And then with the biquintile between Sun and Saturn, you can make it useful. You can make it real. You can make it part of your everyday life, part of your routine. So with this biquintile, don't take your talents for granted, and at the same time, don't trivialize them. Don't think that they're not important. They are important. They can be important, and through the power of your will, you can make something real, and you can realize that there is something that you know well, that you can be very good at, and that you can also be appreciated for. Taurus. The weekend starts with the moon in your sign, and indeed starts with a last quarter moon. So we've got a moon in late Taurus making a square to the sun, and so there is a question: where do you take things? Because the moon is waning. It's getting smaller. If you can see the moon, where I am, we're getting clouds. It's raining here in Washington State, or Western Washington State. But it doesn't really matter whether you can see the moon or not. The fact is, the moon is square the sun at the beginning of a weekend, and perhaps something has to give. If it doesn't give, then potentially you've missed an opportunity. So where have things been going? How do you want to take things? What's the next stage? And so there is perhaps a danger that you do nothing. That might be the line of least resistance. The sun is in Leo. Leo is a fairly down-to-earth part of your chart. You want to be secure, and you can be secure, but there is a price to security, and the price to security can be that you really, you don't get anything done, and you get stuck. And so this moon, this last quarter moon is telling you that you perhaps have to be more dynamic, and you have to be clear about what you want and what matters to you. And just because on the face of it there are no opportunities doesn't mean you can't do something, doesn't mean you can't create opportunities. And at the moment, Taurus, you do feel somewhat dissatisfied. Things could be better. A part of it is because of the last quarter moon. Additionally, you're aware that you have got the ability to create change if you want to create change. But the question is, do you want to? Are you really ready to take the initiative? Can you be bothered? So these are the kind of questions that you've got, and your natural inclination might be to do nothing. But I do think that would be a shame, and you shouldn't forget, Taurus, that Venus is still pretty close to Jupiter. Venus is your ruler. It's within 5 degrees of making a conjunction to Jupiter. That Venus-Jupiter conjunction is a major feature of this week. It's a very fortunate aspect, and you can still take advantage of it. So try, if you possibly can, to be noticed. Even if you don't want to be noticed, say something, do something. Move beyond, wherever you are, if you possibly can. And it might be hard work, but I think it will be worth it. Now, the moon does leave Taurus and it moves into Gemini, and with the moon moving into Gemini, that does create a new set of challenges. And we could actually say we've got a grand trine in air signs, because the moon makes a conjunction to Uranus, and Uranus is sort of trine Mars, it is trine Pluto, and the moon is sort of bringing that grand trine together. And this might relate to money. I mean, a moon conjunct Uranus in Gemini for a Taurus can be about a realization and an awareness that perhaps you need to change your relationship to money. And you should not forget that Uranus has been in Gemini for 5 weeks or so, and so this is a big change, and it says something about the next 7 years. And so with Uranus in Gemini, Taurus, it is a time where you need to rethink your ideas about money, your relationship to money. You might have ideas about how much money is coming in, but that can change, and you shouldn't think that you are helpless, that you are restricted to a particular income. You think, oh well, there's only this amount of money coming in and it's going to stay like that. Well, you shouldn't think like that. You should take things to a new level, and you should use your imagination. And perhaps that's what the moon conjunct Uranus is telling you. And the moon is not just making a conjunction to Uranus; it's making a sextile to Saturn. So that's about you having an idea, an inspiration, thinking, oh, this might be possible. But Saturn is saying, well, what are you going to do about it? And Saturn is encouraging you to stabilize the situation, but also to be aware of change. So you want to change the balance and find a new balance. And so that might be what you need to do. And so, do not ignore the financial side of life. It might not be something you want to be bothered with, but you're a Taurus, and the material world should matter to you. And the material world, of course, has many dimensions. It's the material world as in the environment, but it's also the material world as in how much money you've got in the bank. So it all matters. So that should be something that you should be paying attention to over the weekend. And don't think that you're not lucky, because you can be lucky, because Venus and Jupiter are still making a conjunction. Gemini. I see no reason why it can't be a good weekend, but maybe I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I have my sun in Gemini, and the reason it's a good weekend is very straightforward. The moon is moving into your sign, and quite when it moves into your sign, well, that does depend on where you are. Sort of on Saturday at 1 minute past 5 in the afternoon, London time. That's when the moon moves into Gemini. So if you're in Europe or Africa, the moon will be in Gemini by the end of Saturday, late afternoon, early evening. If you're in the Americas, then if you're in New York, for example, it will be in Gemini Saturday at just around noon, 1 minute after noon, even earlier if you're in California or Hawaii or Chicago or anywhere anywhere in the time zone west of the Eastern Standard Time. So this is something to look forward to, not just because moon is in Gemini. We can always say something positive about the moon being in Gemini. You can say that I can say that you're feeling at home. You're feeling that comfortable with things. I often say that when the moon moves into someone's sign, but it goes beyond that, because the moon does make some important aspects, and in particular there is a grand trine, really. So I talked about a grand trine sort of earlier, maybe a week ago, and I was saying that Uranus, Pluto, and Mars were in making an airy grand trine, because Uranus is in Gemini, Pluto in Aquarius, Mars in Libra, and this grand trine is starting to separate. And it's because Mars is moving on, and so you might think that the energy of that grand trine has gone, but that is not true, because of the moon. And what the moon is doing is it's bringing everything back into alignment. So the moon is makes a conjunction to Uranus, then it makes a trine to Pluto, and then it makes a trine to Mars. So Gemini, do take advantage of this grand trine. You might feel that you'd miss the opportunity. Perhaps there was a lot of energy around maybe a week ago, and you've missed the chance, but you haven't missed the chance at all, because it's all coming back. And with the moon in Gemini, things can really move. And perhaps the challenge here is to take an idea, or take not just one idea but lots of ideas, and turn them into something real. And that is a genuine challenge, because there aren't any planets in Earth signs once the moon moves out of Taurus into Gemini. So it's not very grounded. And the advantage of there being no Earth signs is that there's no limitation. So you could say that with no Earth, you're free to move one way, this way, that way. You can float off into nowhere if you so wish. And so instead, what we have is the moon making a sextile to Saturn, and that sextile Saturn may be very important, because that sextile to Saturn is giving you the opportunity to ground things. It's all very well having lots of ideas, seeing all of these opportunities to really make things happen, but there is this question: where is it all going? And Saturn does give you a degree of discipline, being able to anchor things. So don't feel that it's all hot air, but it could be hot air if you're careless, if you're not sufficiently disciplined. But Gemini, I do believe that you can handle it, and don't forget that the moon is making a sextile to Mercury, and so that does make it personal. Sort of moon in Gemini making a sextile to Mercury, which is your ruler, and that does allow you to connect with what is going on. And because it's a sextile, we have an element of talent there, being aware of what you can do. And this sextile between Moon and Mercury, it sort of brings together Mercury and Saturn. So Mercury is in a very wide trine with Saturn. Mercury trine Saturn with a 6-degree orb. Now that's normally a massive orb. I wouldn't even regard that as a trine, but the moon brings it together. The moon makes sextile to Saturn, then it makes a sextile to Mercury, and that aspect really does allow you to get yourself together and to make something real. And so whatever your ideas, whatever you think is possible, perhaps Gemini, you are just so used to having ideas which in the end get nowhere, that you end up just having an idea, thinking, oh, that's nice, but it's going nowhere because it's gone nowhere in the past. And so you just fit in with a pattern. And maybe this weekend you need to start thinking about how you're going to break that pattern. Taking an idea, maybe just one idea or two ideas. You're a Gemini, you're allowed to do things in twos, you don't have to have just one. So you take two ideas and you ask yourself, well, what do you need to do to make them happen? And just go and do it. Just keep it simple, but give it your best shot, and you might be pleasantly surprised by the outcome. Cancer. The weekend is arguably split. The beginning of a weekend might be different from the end of it, and that's especially the case if you're in Australia or New Zealand, because in Australia and New Zealand you've got for all of Saturday the moon is in Taurus, and pretty much for all of Sunday the moon is in Gemini. So that makes for a nice split in the weekend. If you're in other places, it's slightly more lopsided. So if you're in Alaska, then the moon moves into Gemini on Saturday morning, or Hawaii, and so the whole weekend is pretty much moon in Gemini. So yeah, it does depend. But while the moon is in Taurus, it's a great place for the moon to be in Taurus, and so if you have the chance, you may have to sort things out very early. You may have the possibility to be with people, enjoy people's company, enjoy the fact that Venus and Jupiter are still making a conjunction to one another in your sign. They're only they're less than 5 degrees apart, and so it can be a weekend that has a very sociable start, and early morning socializing on Saturday, may not be such a bad thing if you happen to be awake. But it does depend on your time zone. And in the end, the moon does move into Gemini, and really the real action takes place while the moon is in Gemini. And then that says something about what kind of approach you want to adopt. And with the moon in Gemini, Cancer, you might not want to put yourself out too much. There is a lot going on, and there is a grand trine in air signs, arguably. The moon moves into Gemini, it makes a conjunction to Uranus, it makes a trine to Pluto, and then in the end it makes a trine to Mars. So you're aware of the possibilities for action, but you don't really want to engage with it. You've got other things to do, you've got other concerns, and perhaps you just want a quiet life. So the question is, where is the action taking place? Well, the action might be taking place in your own world, and you yourself can see that things are changing, and you're also very aware of your own power, but you're also very aware of your own reservations. You have your doubts about a lot of things, and you certainly don't want to take risks. And you're dealing with a lot of energy, and you're dealing also with people that have a lot of energy, and it can be all too much if you're not careful. Though I think that you should, as far as possible, be open-minded. You just you don't know what other people are able to offer, and just because someone seems dangerous doesn't necessarily mean that they are dangerous. And it can be that with the right people around you, you can bring something down to earth. The moon does make a sextile to Saturn, and as well as a conjunction to Uranus, and so perhaps there's something that you're uncertain about, there are people you're uncertain about, but you can get reassurances if you really look for it. And aside from that, we shouldn't forget that it is a last quarter moon. Last quarter moon happens when the moon is in late Taurus, at the beginning of the weekend. The moon in late Taurus square the sun in late Leo, and this is a time when you're thinking about whether it's really worth it. Is something worth pursuing? Because the last quarter moon is a time of crisis, when you think back to this whole lunar cycle. This lunar cycle, when did it start? It started with the new moon on which was sort of late July the 24th. There was a new moon, and you've been sort of trying to work with this lunar cycle. And do you really want to make something of it? And it might not be easy, it might not be worth it, and it could just be more trouble than it's worth. So when I talk about last quarter moons, I often say something like, "Oh, well, you've got to do something now before it's too late." Maybe you've got to take some kind of initiative and so on. But it's not always about initiative. It's going to be about considering an action, and then perhaps realizing that you just don't want to do it, but it's just not worth it. And that last quarter moon, the moon in Taurus, square Sun in Leo. The moon is relatively close to Algol, that rather difficult fixed star, associated with evil things, evil actions, maybe even evil people. It's maybe not a great last quarter moon, even though the moon is in Taurus, and you might decide to just not do anything and just let this lunar cycle run its course, and look forward to the new moon in a week's time. And so when the moon goes into Gemini, as it will go into Gemini over the weekend, you might just enjoy the fact that you're not doing anything, that you've decided to pass on something. Yeah, you had the opportunity, you looked at the pros and cons, and you decided it was best to do nothing. And maybe that says something about your weekend. But I would say that you shouldn't do nothing. I think it can be a good weekend, but you have to see everything in your own terms, and you do what is important for you, and it probably doesn't have to be advertised, and you don't have to talk about it very much. I think with Moon sextile Saturn, though, that does indicate that you and another person do have something to say to each other, and you shouldn't entirely forget about your ambitions. Saturn is in Aries. That's quite an ambitious place for Saturn to be, and Saturn is not going to be in Aries forever. Saturn. When does Saturn move out of Aries? Saturn moves out of Aries end of a month, right at the end of the month, sort of around September the 1st, August the 31st. When Saturn goes into Aries, it goes out of Aries, then for a short period of time, you'll be sort of going back to the past, revisiting past challenges. And so while Saturn is in Aries, while the moon is making a sextile to Saturn, there may just be something that you want to do that's important to you, and it may help you in terms of setting up the next week. Don't forget about next week, and it could be that there are things you can do over the weekend which will put you in a better position. But there's no real urgency here, and if you miss a chance, miss an opportunity, it doesn't matter. There will be other opportunities. So it's a weekend which whatever you make of it. So I don't want to push you into any particular course of action. Leo, don't forget, Leo, that the sun is still in your sign, and in less than a week it will be gone. So do take advantage of the sun being in Leo, and really make the most of everything that's happening. And this weekend, at the beginning of a weekend, we have a last quarter moon. So we've got the moon in late Taurus making a square to the sun in late Leo. And the last quarter moon does say something about the lunar cycle that you've just been going through. So, at the end of July, we had a new moon. I think that was at 2 degrees Leo. And hopefully, Leo, this was a new beginning. It was also marked the beginning of a period of time when many Leos should have been on good form. It should have been a great time for you. It's a great time of year for you when the sun is moving through Leo. It's not just the fact that, well, if you've got if you're looking at the signs from the perspective of the sun rather than the ascendant, of course it would then be your birthday season. But of course, if you're coming to this reading with you because you've got Leo rising, it's not your birthday season. But the sun is still moving through your whole sign first house, so it's a time of action when you should be really making the most of things. And this last quarter moon is perhaps telling you that you do need to get yourself together. The moon is waning; it's coming to the end. The next new moon, in less than a week's time, is in Virgo. It's over. The Leo season will be over. So this last quarter moon hopefully will encourage you to do something if you haven't done it already. So try not to have a lazy weekend, and this applies to the whole weekend, not just part of it. So if possible, on Saturday, early on Saturday, get yourself together, decide what needs to be done, and it can be a very active and constructive weekend. Now, the moon does move out of Taurus into Gemini, and with the moon moving into Gemini, it's a time when you can enjoy yourself for sure, and you might realize that there are opportunities that are certainly available to you. If you want to have fun, if you want to be creative, if you want to enjoy other people's company up to a point. So other people are there for you. That's true. They're there to provide you with excitement and encouragement and perhaps intellectual stimulation. But as far as close relationships are concerned, or indeed sort of anything emotional, it may be, Leo, that there is something that you're just holding back. You don't want to get too close to anyone. You don't want to reveal things. And if you try to get close to anyone, or if you try to be emotional, it just may not work. It just may feel that something is rather stuck, and that might just create an atmosphere that is really very sort of unsatisfactory, and it's just not especially pleasant. So, Leo, when dealing with other people, if possible, so keep it at a sort of a mental level. It should be about ideas rather than emotions, and that is in keeping with the moon being in Gemini. And so the moon in Gemini, it does make a grand trine in air signs. Air signs, they like variety. They like having lots of people. So yes, you can have lots of people around you, and you can discuss things. You can laugh at things, but just don't get too close. But don't get too emotional, because that would spoil things. That could spoil what could be a very good weekend. And so it's just important to keep things moving. Don't dwell on any one thing, on any one emotion. If something bothers you, probably best not to talk about it. Just move on to the next thing. And through that very active approach, it might seem superficial. One is supposed to be emotional. Emotions are supposed to be good things. People talk about emotional intelligence, but emotions are not necessarily good, and it depends on what's going on. And right now for you, Leo, where there's an emotion, there's a problem. Virgo. At the moment, Virgo, we have the moon moving into Gemini, and the moon will be in Gemini certainly throughout Sunday. Could be in Gemini through most of Saturday if you're in the Americas, certainly if you're on the West Coast. So Moon in Gemini from a Virgo perspective is a good thing. It's very focused. You know what is important to you, and you're perhaps relatively ambitious. What is it that you want to do? And I don't think that you want to waste the weekend. Okay, you maybe don't have so much pressure on Saturday. On Saturday, you can drift, especially Saturday morning. You can do whatever you need to do. There is no pressure. But as the moon moves into Gemini, the moon makes a conjunction to Uranus, and then it moves on and it makes a trine to Pluto, it makes a trine to Mars, and that really activates you. And you're thinking, what needs to be done, and you might also have ideas. There are suddenly possibilities, and you shouldn't want to waste them. I mean, you could waste them. That is entirely possible. One problem with the moon moving into Gemini is that it moves out of Taurus, and it was good when the moon was in Taurus. It was exalted, and most importantly, Taurus is an earth sign. So with the moon in Taurus, people were grounded. You were grounded. You were fairly sure of your environment, and so that felt fine. But now that the moon is in Gemini, there is a lack of groundedness here, and things could so easily just float off, and you could try to do this, you could try to do that, and you could get absolutely nowhere. That is a possibility, and it would particularly be a possibility if there are loads of distractions. People saying that you should do this or that, and you've got appointments, you've got agreements, you've got to honour what you've said, and you could end up just getting nowhere because you move from one thing to another, and just in the end nothing happens. But that would be unnecessary, and it is important that you're able to show some discipline, and that's something you can do. It won't be 100% easy, but you've just got to decide what is important. Just one or two things that matter, and do give it your best shot, and you don't be afraid of being original. Originality really does matter at the moment for yourself, because that things aren't going to stay like they are forever, and that's part of the nature of Uranus being in Gemini. Uranus had been in Taurus for a long time. July the 7th it moved into Gemini, and so from a Virgo perspective, you are hopefully starting to see the road ahead in a new way, and you're starting to see new possibilities for yourself. And this weekend, with this grand trine in air signs, which is very much connected with Uranus, I do think that things really can move. Now, what I've said so far, might sound a bit harsh. There are other things going on. We've still got a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter, and that Venus-Jupiter conjunction is within 5 degrees. It's still very active, and it does say something about how you're able to get on with people. And so if you are meeting people over the course of a weekend, whether it's Saturday or Sunday, you can make a good impression, and you can certainly enjoy people's company, and you can be a stabilizing influence, and additionally through other people you can find your own luck. But you just don't want to get caught up in it all. There are things that need to be done this weekend, connected with the moon in Gemini and that grand trine and air sign. You do need to bring things down to earth if you possibly can, and sort of unfocused socializing, it just could get out of control and you could waste a lot of time. So, do try to have a balanced weekend. Do what you enjoy, but also do what is important to you and your immediate future. Libra. The Venus-Jupiter conjunction, which I've been going on and on about, is still there. It's still operational. And so I would urge you to continue to take advantage of it. And it is the weekend, and so there may be opportunities for using this conjunction in a recreational way, enjoying yourself, enjoying other people's company. Venus is close to Jupiter. People are going to like you, and you're going to be able to present yourself extremely well. But there is a practical side to Venus conjunct Jupiter. It is about making sure that your own potential is going to be maximized, and it might seem to be the weekend. Weekend is a time for traditionally doing very little, but I would urge you not to do absolutely nothing this weekend. Make the most of that Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And if there's anything hanging over from a week, from Monday through to Friday, there's some unfinished business, something that hasn't been resolved, then over the weekend it might be a good idea to address yourself to it. And you're going to be helped by the fact that there is a lot of action from a Libran perspective, because we have a grand trine in air signs. We've got Mars is moving through your sign. It's kind of making a trine to Pluto. It's kind of making a trine to Uranus. Now that grand trine between Mars, Pluto and Uranus is not as exact as it used to be, but the moon moving into Gemini has brought things back into focus. And so moon making a conjunction to Uranus, trine to Mars, trine to Pluto, that's all happening, and it can be exciting, and it can also be inspirational, and things going on that really should grab your attention. It can perhaps show you a path to a bright future, and it's not all about you. Mars is in Libra, and Mars can represent another person. It can represent another person who is very excitable, who might also have a lot to offer. They could be a disruptor, but there's nothing wrong with disruption in itself. I mean, you can have disruption and it can just be a real pain, but sometimes you need disruption because it breaks a pattern. Sometimes you get stuck in a pattern and it lasts forever, and you don't change, you don't see other possibilities, and it can be a big waste if you're not careful. So take advantage of the energy of that grand trine, in air signs, and and at the same time, Venus is conjunct Jupiter, so it can be a very active weekend, and it's also a weekend where you can be very conscious of your own power and your ability to create change. And why would you want to create change? It's because you find yourself very focused on something. You decide something is important and it just won't go away. You keep returning to it. You're not comfortable about something. It could be better. You'd like to do something else, but it's still there. And there might be a point of obsession there. And obsession isn't necessarily a bad thing. You're obsessed with something having to be changed, obsessed that something is not good enough. And Libra, I do think that obsession can allow you to take action, and you can resolve something which had perhaps been hanging around for ages, but finally you can sort it out, and you can be pretty dramatic about it. And that's also reflected by what we have in the heliocentric chart. From a heliocentric point of view, if you remember, I mean, let me just show you what I mean by the heliocentric chart. So if we quickly go back to the heliocentric chart, remember in the heliocentric chart this weekend, Venus is moving to a conjunction of Uranus, and it's also making a sextile to Saturn. And so Libra, that conjunction of to Uranus does allow you to create change. And because Venus is also sextile Saturn, it allows you to take a change and to stabilize it, to make it permanent. So you're perhaps going to be unhappy about something, you're obsessed about something, you decide you take action, you decide you want to take action, you take action, your action is dramatic, it's successful, and it's permanent. So you're in quite a powerful position, Libra. I mean, so don't underestimate yourself, and you don't have to put up with anything. Scorpio. The moon starts the weekend in Taurus, and in Taurus it makes a square to the sun. In other words, the weekend starts with a last quarter moon. So a last quarter moon can be a moment of decision, where you have to decide, what are you going to do next, and what are you going to do in order to resolve some problem, some issue, or some question. And it occurs to you that, if you don't do anything, you might have missed your chance, at least in the short term, because the lunar cycle is nearly over. In less than a week there'll be a new moon, Virgo new moon, and we'll be on to something else. So at the moment, Scorpio, you should be asking yourself, what it is, and whether it really needs to be thought about, and whether you need to actually do something. It might relate to other people, and you look at some of the people in your life, some of the people that perhaps are important to you, and you're wondering, what next? Where is this going? And you're also starting to see the influence of certain other people, how they are helpful and how perhaps they are unhelpful. You have your own expectations, you have your own ambitions, and there are going to be things and people that help you achieve your ambitions, but there are going to be other things which are holding you back, and there may be certain people holding you back. And with this last quarter moon, you could have a realization that something needs to be changed. And if you do want to make any changes socially over the weekend, you very much can. And you can be quite sort of direct and to the point. And your position is further improved by the fact that in most cases you're going to have the element of surprise. Now, the moon does leave Taurus and it moves into Gemini, and so with the moon moving into Gemini, in the end it makes a trine to Mars. It makes quite a lot of aspects. It starts by making a conjunction to Uranus, sextile to Saturn. It makes a trine to Pluto. Then it makes a trine to Mars. So Mars is in the spotlight here. So Mars is in Libra. It's separating from a trine to Pluto, but the moon brings it together. The moon creates a grand trine. You could say, Moon, Mars, Pluto, and that is about your power. And you have the real power to create change. And you can do it in such a way that no one really knows what's going on. And again, this goes back to you having the element of surprise. And so if you're not happy about something, you don't have to announce it. You don't have to complain. It's best not to complain, because if you complain about something in public and you say what's wrong and you pontificate, it's arguably a sign of weakness, because it's showing that you're not prepared to do anything about it if you're just talking about it. But if you just go and do it, you do what you feel needs to be done, then you will, straight away have a very powerful influence, and people will respect you, even if they don't know you. I mean, they might know you on the surface, but do they really know the real Scorpio? Probably not. And especially, by the end of a weekend, I think that you're going to be wanting to keep a lot to yourself, and you're going to want to consolidate your own power, and that includes your emotional power. Sagittarius, don't forget that Venus and Jupiter are still very close to one another. I've gone on and on about this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, and it was exact, nearly a week ago. But Venus and Jupiter are still, less than 5 degrees apart, and so that means that Jupiter, your ruler, is still benefiting from Venus in Cancer. It's benefiting from the proximity of this very fortunate planet. So, with Venus conjunct Jupiter, you continue to be fortunate, and if you make an effort to do something, there's a very good chance that things will go your way. So it's important to believe in yourself, but at the same time, don't think that it's all down to you. Especially this weekend, when the moon is moving into Gemini, and with the moon moving into Gemini, one immediately thinks of other people, of relationships, because Gemini is, of course, your opposite sign. Gemini is opposite Sagittarius, and so that represents perhaps everything that is outside. It represents the other, and so when the moon moves into Gemini, you might find that other people require more attention, or you just find yourself paying more attention to other people, and there could be some surprises along the way, because when moon moves into Gemini, it makes a conjunction to Uranus, and moon conjunct Uranus is quite an excitable aspect, and it stirs things up, and so you might think that everything's going one way, and in fact there's sudden change, a change that could well be brought about by another person. And it's important that you don't jump to conclusions. Changes in themselves are probably quite neutral. You can't say that a change is good or bad, but it depends what you make of it. And so, as far as possible, do try to be positive and see the opportunities rather than the challenges. And that even includes if you appear to be messed around. An appointment maybe get cancelled, or someone arrives out of the blue and you hadn't prepared and you don't know what to do. But surprises, especially social surprises, should in most cases be welcomed. And the moon is additionally, the moon is making a trine to Mars. That's a pretty active aspect, and it's also very sociable. And so people are capable of doing lots of different things, and I think that in most cases it's going to be fairly supportive. And so do have an open mind, and it's not down to you necessarily, Sagittarius, to make all the decisions, to always be the one taking the initiative. Sometimes you can just relax and let things just happen, and see where things take you. Though it doesn't mean that you don't have any agency. At the moment, you have very real agency, and if there's something you're not happy about, you feel that or something needs to be done, or indeed if you see an opportunity and you feel that you absolutely want to do something about it right now, then Jupiter is going to facilitate that. I mean, Jupiter, don't forget, is your ruler. Remember, it's conjunct Venus, and so that just gives you the ability to come over in a very sort of smooth way if you want to. And if you want to suddenly up the pace and increase the energy levels to maximum, then that'll be fine. So surprises can work both ways. Other people can certainly deliver surprises which might catch you unawares, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you want to surprise other people, not just for the sake of it, but something happens, you feel that you really want to do something, you want to say something, then Sagittarius, you very much can. Capricorn. At the moment, Capricorn, you may be of the view that there are things that do need to be done. That they do need to be finished off. If you wait, then the situation might be suboptimal. So the moment, Capricorn, that you think that something has to be done, that something has to be put into action, then you should go for it. You shouldn't wait, and you shouldn't worry too much about other people's complaints, or some people might regard it as being inconvenient, or it might be a disturbance. If something has to be done, even if it's apparently trivial, then just go and do it. And if you need to round people up and tell people what to do, then fair enough. Don't feel bad about it. And additionally, a Capricorn, there is a grand trine in air signs. So grand trines in air signs are not necessarily what Capricorn wants to hear about. It's in an air sign. Air signs are a bit flaky. They can seem a bit flaky, especially from a Capricorn perspective. Lots of ideas. Ideas can get nowhere. And that's always a possibility, especially now. This weekend we've got Moon moving out of Taurus, and so when the Moon moves out of Taurus, there are no planets in Earth signs. But don't worry, we're about to get planets in Earth signs. The Sun is going to go into Virgo pretty soon, in less than a week. But for the moment, there can be a lack of groundedness, and you might regard other people as having a lack of groundedness. They're going off on their own tangent. They don't seem to necessarily know what they're doing, and it would be better if they were more sensible. But maybe it's not such a bad thing. This grand trine for you can be inspiring, and it can be motivating. The Moon is making a trine to Mars. Mars is in Libra. Don't forget Mars is in Libra. Mars is in an angular sign. It's an angular sign from at least from a Capricorn perspective, and so you are ambitious. You can be ambitious, and Mars as a planet does have a special relationship to Capricorn. I mean, Mars doesn't rule Capricorn by sign, but it does rule Capricorn by exaltation, and so it's your exaltation ruler, and Mars is in Libra, which is the exaltation sign of Saturn, which is your ruler. So Mars is your friend, and Mars in Libra, it's going to be there until September the 22nd. So it is a time, Capricorn, where you really need to apply yourself, and it may be the weekend, but that doesn't mean that you should stop applying yourself. Especially when you've got this grand trine, when you've got Mars still fairly close to a trine of Pluto, when you've got the Moon making a trine to Mars, and that Moon trine Mars can be can be very motivating, and you know what needs to be done, and you're thinking ahead, and it might be the case that no one really understands what you're doing or why you're doing what you're doing, but that doesn't matter. You have got your own reasons and your own logic, and you should hold fast to that, because it's like a guide. And so whatever you're doing, it does seem, Capricorn, you're doing it right. Even if a lot of people don't understand. And as far as relationships are concerned, there continues to be a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. So Venus and Jupiter are now about 5 degrees apart. And 5 degrees, it's good enough. As you move into next week, Venus is going to be further and further away from Jupiter, and so the power of that Venus-Jupiter conjunction is going to be falling off rapidly. So you could say that this weekend is perhaps your last chance to really use that Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, it's in Cancer, it's in your opposite sign. It says a lot about other people and what other people can do for you. And you can be the recipient of other people's generosity. I think I've said that before, but I'm just reminding you. You shouldn't think that other people are useless. They can't offer you anything. They can, and if you give them a chance, but you at the same time you need to have a modicum of control. I mean, it is a weekend where you need to know what you're doing. You don't want to just be in a situation where you're just having to follow other people's whims. That would be a shame, because you do have things to do. But once you've you've sorted everything out, once you give time to other people, and from a relationship angle, you do be open-minded and allow things to develop. That Venus-Jupiter conjunction can work for you, and you just don't feel that it's all one way, that it's you having to do things and that other people are useless. They're not. And if you give people a chance, then they can do things for you. And so in the end, there can be a balance, and whatever efforts you put in, you will be rewarded. And this does include the area of relationships. Aquarius. The moon is moving into Gemini, and of course Gemini is an air sign, and we have a grand trine in air signs. We had a grand trine in air signs a few days ago. Was it about a week ago? I was talking about it, and this grand trine in air signs seemed to have lost its power, because Mars was making a trine to Mars in Libra, was making trines to Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini. But then the moon comes along and moves into Gemini, and so the moon moves into Gemini over the weekend. And so when the moon moves into Gemini, it reforms this grand trine in air signs, and this means that things are starting to move again. So if you felt you'd missed a chance, or you'd missed the moment, then this weekend is another chance when your mind is going to be on great form, your ideas are going to be there, and things will really start to move, if you give them a chance. Now, it might not feel at the beginning of a weekend that much is happening. At the beginning of a weekend, things might seem rather stark, and you're not looking for variety. You just want a quiet life. That's how the weekend starts. But then the moon moves into Gemini, and well, it could be as early as this Saturday morning. If you're in the Americas, it could be as late as Sunday, early on Sunday, if you're in Australia or New Zealand. But certainly by Sunday, moon will be in Gemini, and this grand trine in air signs will be really working for you. And the moon is making a conjunction to Uranus, and so the moon conjunct Uranus, and of course it's making other aspects involved with the grand trine, but that moon Uranus trine is about your originality and being aware of how original you can be. And so, originality is something to be really valued, and you can do something or think something that just no one else is capable of doing. And so don't be afraid to be original, and it's important that you're appreciated for your originality. And if people don't appreciate your originality, well, that is their problem. It's all about you, and that is what this grand trine is about. And don't forget Saturn. The role of Saturn here is to stabilize things, is to make things permanent. And Saturn is, of course, your ruler. So the moon does make a conjunction to Uranus. It does make this grand trine, making trines to Uranus, to Pluto and Mars as well. But it also makes a sextile to Saturn. And there's a sextile relationship between the moon and Saturn, even after the moon has moved away from the exact sextile. And that sextile does allow you to take something that seems tenuous, unstable, fleeting, and to take it and to hold it and to make it more permanent. And so don't just enjoy yourself, don't just live for the moment. Think about extending that moment, extending it for days, weeks, months, even years. Yeah, it can be done, but you need to have some discipline there, and you have to understand what is important. Because if you don't understand what is important and you're just living for the moment, then the moment could, in the end, pass you by. So that's something that you really need to think about. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, it's true that the Sun and Mercury are in Leo, and so Leo's your opposite sign. So this, in general, is a time when you have to probably pay more attention to people than usual. But that doesn't mean to say that everything is swinging, especially on an emotional level. On an emotional level, there are certain things that are being held back, and I think it's going to be difficult for other people to relax emotionally, and they might be worried about things which you might not regard as being, strictly speaking, relevant, but it just may be about a lack of expression. And so you can certainly enjoy people's company, that's true, but if you've got a lot of expectations there, then certainly on an emotional level, well, you might be disappointed. So so keep in mind what's important this weekend. It's that grand trine in air signs. It's not a grand trine in water signs. The grand trine in air is about ideas. It's not about emotions. And so if you move onto emotional territory, or you feel yourself moving onto emotional territory, then ideally you should move away as quickly as possible, because I don't think powerful emotions are the way forward this weekend. And so communications should be logical, or they should be about ideas. If you try to play emotional games, it's just not going to work, and it might just feel that something is just stuck and rather frozen. But this shouldn't take away from this weekend. It can be a great weekend, provided you focus on what makes the weekend great, like this grand trine in air signs, and just the emotional side of things, well, you can leave that until later. Pisces, don't forget that Venus and Jupiter conjunction is still active. It's 5 degrees apart. in a few days' time, its influence may start to really fall off. So, do take advantage of it. This Venus-Jupiter conjunction, as I've kept saying, it's very fortunate. And so, this weekend, it's still there. So do avail yourself of it. Do something fun. Don't feel that you have to compromise. And yeah, if you want to enjoy yourself, you can. And I think you can enjoy yourself in the company of other people, provided these other people are on your wavelength and they really do appreciate you and they appreciate your special talents and special attributes. So, that's one thing that, we do need to remember. Now, as far as what's happening, particularly over the weekend, there is a change going on. I mean, the moon is moving through sort of late Taurus, and then it moves into Gemini. And so with the moon in late Taurus, well, we have a last quarter moon. And so that, that last quarter moon might be about you having to think about something before it's too late. And it might be, Pisces, that you're involved in trying to sort something out, or you're involved in some piece of work. It doesn't matter if it's a weekend or not, but you're just involved in something and you're putting it all together. And now with that last quarter moon is an opportunity to make a final change. So, if you leave it beyond the last quarter, what you're trying to create, what you're trying to work on, that's the finished product. You can't make changes. So if you want to make changes to something, then the last quarter moon might be your final chance to do it. And so why would you make changes? It could be that you find something out. You have perhaps taken a piece of information for granted. You think, well, this is the way it is. But the moment you ask questions, you do some research, you realize that it's not quite what you thought. But it's not a big deal. You can make a few changes based on new information. But don't leave it too long. If you leave it until the beginning of next week, well, it'll be too late. So don't assume that what you're working on need be the finished product. And aside from that, we've got the moon moving into Gemini. And the moon moving into Gemini might represent a time, a couple of days, perhaps through until Monday, when you don't really want to stick your neck out. You don't want to really be seen and heard, especially in public. Why take the risk? And besides, there are things you need to work on, and the moon making a conjunction to Uranus might indicate a surprise, something happening that you weren't expecting, and it could happen close to home. It could happen in the home, or it could relate to your family, or your attitude to your home. And it is a reminder that Uranus is in Gemini, and Uranus on and off will be in Gemini for the next 7 years. And so that says something about your attitude to your living space, to security, to your family. And it's a long process. It's not like you could expect anything to happen the moment Uranus moves into Gemini. But with the moon making a conjunction to Uranus, it might be just a time when the fact that Uranus in Gemini is emphasized. And the moon doesn't just make a conjunction to Uranus, it also makes a trine to Pluto, it makes a trine to Mars, and so we've got this grand trine in air signs. And so Pisces, you might think that the safe option is to to stay at home or not to extend yourself. But if change has to happen, if surprises have to happen, they're going to happen wherever you are. That perhaps is your fate. I don't want to over dramatize that. So something may happen, something may occur to you that says something about the future. It says something about your attitudes to the future, and it just may be something you think about. So if you suddenly think that some aspect of your home life isn't perfect, needs to be changed, it might just be a sudden thought, a passing thought, but that may say something about your attitude and what you're going to do, what you're going to decide, maybe months into the future. And so perhaps this weekend you have a glimpse into the future, you have a glimpse into your future, and you start to get an idea about the way your expectations are going to change and what your attitude to your living arrangements is going to be. And maybe there's a clue here that things aren't going to stay the same forever. And that, Pisces, is something that should be welcomed. And change is important. If you stay in one place for too long, you get stuck and things get just too static, and you do need to move on. So that might be something that you need to work on. And if you want to create short-term change, if you're not happy with the way something is over the weekend, then feel free to assert yourself. It won't be so difficult. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And it's now time to look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 34, the power of the great. And the power of the great does indicate something huge, the potential for creating real change, and it could be our potential for creating change. And maybe in terms of what's going on this weekend, the fact that we've got this grand trine in air signs, that could represent the power of the great, but it's in air signs, and air signs are about ideas and concepts. They're not necessarily about concrete action. So power of a great might be great ideas, great possibilities, but what about the reality of the situation? Are we really going to be able to see it through? And so that's something we need to think about. And the power of a great can become excessive. We might believe that we can do things, but the reality might be very different. Now, with this hexagram, we have two lines. The second line moves and the third line moves. And the second line does indicate that things are starting to move, that we're aware perhaps of our greatness and of our potential for creating action. That's certainly possible. I mean, we still need a degree of discipline. We can't just act in a sort of a chaotic way, and that is a really important point about the power of the great. It's, are we the great, or is it something great that is trying to influence us, that is trying to control us? So that's something we need to be careful about. And then the third line moves, and the third line moving is a problem. And the problem is that we might take something too far, and we might believe that we can do things. We might be absolutely sure of ourselves, almost to the point of arrogance. And we might just say, well, let's take action now. And we might well be complacent. and we might really enjoy our power, enjoy those first successes. But there's danger. There's danger on the horizon, and the further we go, the more difficult it becomes. And if you think about that third line, the third line is the transition from the bottom trigram to the top trigram. And can we make that transition? And the I Ching is suggesting that maybe we can't. And one of the imageries that I Ching uses is of a goat getting its sort of horns just stuck in a hedge, or maybe a thorny hedge. We butt into something and we just get completely stuck. And so if we are sensible, we will back off. We will realize that it's all too much for us. And so, don't try too hard over the weekend. And it could say something about Saturday and Sunday. You move from maybe the sort of bottom trigram is about Saturday and the top trigram is about Sunday, and on Saturday we make good progress. We think we're making good progress, and then we take things too far, and then at a certain point we can't move. We are stuck. And this takes us to the second hexagram, which is hexagram number 51, which is thunderbolts. And it could be that we are attracting something, quite dramatic here. And, we're trying our hardest with the previous hexagram, the power of a great, to make something happen, but, we can't do it. And we get stuck. So, but what happens when we're stuck? Then what? Then you move to 51, which is thunderbolts, which is a shock. And again, it could be to do with this grand trine in air signs, and the fact that the moon is quite close to Uranus. Moon conjunct Uranus may be a surprise. Mars is quite close to a trine of Pluto. Moon is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. Suddenly, just something happens that we weren't expecting, and our first inclination may be just to panic. We've taken on too much, and it's all happening, and it's all happening too fast. But the thunderbolts just does tell us to keep our cool. One of the images of the thunderbolts is of having a cup with incense, and there's shaking and thunder, and but we don't drop any of the incense. So whatever's happening, just keep your cool. It'll be okay. And that is the message of the thunderbolts. So the thunderbolts is not actually a bad hexagram. It just seems bad at the time because we're just not used to it. It's unexpected. Very sort of moon conjunct Uranus, and the power of that grand trine in air. But it's a grand trine in air. And so a lot of the shock might be about sort of ideas, people doing a lot of talking, people panicking, but what's really going on? And if we keep our cool, things should be fine. And I want to finish by looking at the horoscope of Prince Andrew. And the reason I'm looking at Prince Andrew, because a book has just come out on him. Apparently this book is really damning. It just says a lot of bad stuff about him, about his life, about Epstein, his personality, his sex life, a lot of stuff, a lot about that. I mean, I don't want to go into any real details. I haven't read the book. I've just heard about it, but it doesn't just go for Andrew. It effectively sort of goes for the whole royal family, and that the Queen, she knew what Andrew was up to, but she didn't do anything because, of course, Andrew was her favourite son, and so this book is maybe quite important, and it sort of helps sort of undermine the reputation of the royal family, and. I think it was pointed out that even though Meghan is unpopular, Prince Andrew is he is 4 times as unpopular as Meghan, so it's bad. And so the reason I'm looking at a royal is because we know about him, and it leads to this question relating to astrology, and the question is this: his character has been slammed. And so if we assume that he really is a bad apple, I mean, okay, he's not a monster, he's not a mass murderer, he's not a war criminal, so, let's not exaggerate here. But he doesn't seem to be a particularly pleasant person. And so that raises the question, what is it in the horoscope which tells us this? And okay, we can look at his horoscope with hindsight, but imagine you're looking at Prince Andrew's horoscope and you know nothing about him. You're just looking at a chart and you're saying, what kind of person is he? And so that is the question that I want to discuss primarily, asking, can we see someone's morality in a chart? I think most people would say no, you can't, because you've got to look at the whole, not just the whole person. You've got to look at their environment, their background, everything that happened in their life, which made them who they are. And maybe the astrology is just one factor. So looking at Andrew's chart, here it is. He was born at 3:30 p.m. on February the 19th, 1960. At 3:26 p.m., 4 minutes before he was born, the sun went into Pisces. So if he'd been born 5 minutes earlier, he would have been an Aquarius. And this is a theme we see in the royal family again and again and again. Planets being on the cusp. You look at William, Prince William. His sun is at, I think, 0 degrees 6 Cancer. So if he'd just been born a bit earlier, he would have been a Gemini. Prince George, I think it's the same thing. I think his sun is at 29 something Cancer. If he'd been born a bit later, he would have been a Leo. I think we see a similar thing with Edward VIII, who abdicated, who became the Duke of Windsor. And so it is a common theme in the royal family, people being born right on the cusp. So if you're trying to predict royal births, when royal births are about to happen, do look at when the sun is going to change sign. Although with Charles, I think he's got his moon at 0. Moon is at 0 degrees Taurus. So Prince Andrew indeed has the sun in Pisces, and it's an absolute change. He has nothing. Okay, he's got Chiron in Aquarius, but once a planet makes that change, moves from one sign into another, it's an absolute thing. It happens instantaneously. So, looking at Andrew's chart, where are the problems? What might make you think that he's a bad person, that he's not a nice person? And of course, when I say he's not a nice person, I'm just going by what the media says. Who knows what he's really like? There is a sort of a minority view that he's not such a bad person. I heard it said that his sort of previous girlfriends have often said that there's nothing wrong with him, that he's polite and everything else. So there is a minority view that says that says that it's all an exaggeration and that he's been sort of unfairly tarnished. But as far as his what is difficult about him, okay, you could start off with his moon. He's got the moon in Scorpio, and his moon is in Scorpio in both Vedic astrology and in Western astrology. So whichever system you use, he's got the moon in Scorpio. Now, 1 in 12 of you listening to me will have your moon in Scorpio. So there is nothing intrinsically wrong with having the moon in Scorpio, but moon in Scorpio does have a difficult reputation because it's fallen, and it's so if you think about moon in Scorpio, you think about being brooding, vengeful, being emotional for sure. having strong emotions, but perhaps those emotions being rather stuck, and there just could be just a sort of a negativity and a sort of an unpleasantness to Moon in Scorpio. And then you could say, well, Sun in Pisces. I mean, Sun in Pisces, again, Sun in Pisces is a placement which has sort of mixed reviews, doesn't it? I mean, with Sun in Pisces, you think of the sensitivity of Sun in Pisces, the emotional awareness of Sun in Pisces, and then you've got the fact that Sun in Pisces can be treacherous. There is a sort of a reputation. Male Pisceans are supposed to be notorious as far as being unfaithful or stringing people along. They make loads and loads of promises, and it doesn't get anywhere. And through their promises, they for example, they promise their girlfriend or their mistress that they promise they'll leave their wife, but they never leave their wife, and they just stay there. So the Sun in Pisces has a difficult reputation in a male chart, of course, because the Sun is a male planet. A woman who's got Sun in Pisces perhaps has to be careful, because that may say something about the man she is attracted to. Mussolini's mistress had Sun in Pisces, and we know what happened to her. She was a real Pisces. She insisted, she stayed with Mussolini right till the end, until she died with him, and she was strung up with him. So that's Sun in Pisces, perhaps in a female chart. But so Sun in Pisces, though, I mean, it should be okay. But then perhaps you have to contrast it with Moon in Scorpio. And, well, 2 planets in water signs, and perhaps it's just a little bit too much water there. So that's quite a subjective combination, Sun in Pisces and Moon in Scorpio. One's feelings are strong, and they are perhaps rather stuck, and the past is strong, and one likes to stay with things, just as they are. And so that might be a way in which the Moon in Pisces and the Sun in Pisces and Moon in Scorpio, although on the surface they sound good, they sound sort of emotionally fluent, maybe even caring, but you have to look at the context, and then you throw in Leo rising. So Leo rising is completely at odds with Sun in Pisces, and arguably with Moon in Scorpio as well. That says something else. Leo rising can be quite opinionated and arrogant. Now, again, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it's not just that 1 in 12 of you watching this have Leo rising. It's more than 1 in 12. It's because in the Northern Hemisphere, the Leo doesn't just rise for 2 hours, it rises for longer than 3 hours, longer than 2 hours. So more than 1 in 12 people have Virgo rising. In the Northern Hemisphere, there are more people with Virgo rising and Leo rising than with other rising signs. It's the opposite in the Southern Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, the most common rising sign is Pisces. In the Northern Hemisphere, the most common rising sign is Virgo. So there are quite a lot of people in the Northern Hemisphere who've got Leo rising, and they're perfectly pleasant. But in Andrew's case, it's manifesting in a particular way. It is about arrogance, and as this book was called, it was about entitlement. I mean, that's what the book was called. What was it? No, sorry, Entitled. That's what Andrew Lowney's book is called. And so Uranus in Leo as well. Uranus can be quite a fixed planet, quite a determined planet. This is who I am, and I don't care about you. So that That's a way of looking at it. And don't forget also, Prince Andrew doesn't have any planets in air signs. Now, there are people who are incredibly intelligent who have no planets in air signs, people who are incredible academics who've got super high IQs, and a lack of air can manifest in many different ways. One way can be fixity, rigidity. So someone who is a successful academic with no air signs means that they stick to what they're interested in. They're interested in one thing and they go with it, and they don't get distracted by nonsense. And it's a lack of air that makes them successful. Or look at Macron. Whatever you think of Macron, he doesn't have any traditional planets in air signs, and Macron. Whatever you think of him, he's a really intelligent man, incredibly intelligent man. Yet he has no air, and he's very fixed, he's very rigid, he's just focused on what he needs to be focused on. But with Prince Andrew, we know that he's apparently not very bright. I mean, let's not exaggerate. I think he's brighter than Prince Harry. He did have a naval career, so to be a naval career, he didn't just leave after the Falklands War. He was progressing through the ranks. I think he would have needed a certain amount of intelligence to have progressed through the ranks, even though he would have had the advantage of being a member of a royal family. Although, in fact, it can be a disadvantage being a member of a royal family and being in the armed forces, and it's difficult to go beyond a certain stage. But he had a naval career. So, he can't be completely stupid, but in his case, his lack of air might represent a lack of objectivity. And he was just so tied up, Moon in Scorpio, Sun in Pisces, that he wasn't able to see it. He wasn't able to understand what he was doing, and he wasn't able to question his own behavior. So that could be a manifestation of a lack of air, and he was so caught up in his emotions. Now, one thing about his moon in Scorpio, I mentioned that he has a moon in moon in Scorpio in both his Vedic chart and his Western chart, and I didn't want to spend long on his Vedic chart, but I wanted to make one observation about his Vedic chart, and it's this: is that if you look at his Vedic chart, here's his Vedic chart, and we do know, of course, that his moon is in Scorpio. And so there's his moon in Scorpio in his Vedic chart. And you'll see that his moon is at 2 degrees 11 minutes of Scorpio. Now, we know that the moon has fallen in Scorpio, but there are degrees of maximum fall. And this is a very interesting thing about Vedic astrology, is that Vedic astrology has this thing called Shadbala. There are 6 ways of determining a planet's strength. And part of Shadbala is, I think it's called Stanabala, which is the position where you analyze the position of a planet. And exaltation is part of it. And so the moon has its degree of maximum exaltation at 3 degrees Taurus. And it has its maximum degree of fall at 3 degrees Scorpio. And as the moon moves between those 2 points, it gains exaltational strength. So if the moon is halfway between 3 degrees Scorpio and 3 degrees Taurus, so for example, if it's at 3 degrees Leo or 3 degrees Aquarius, its exaltational strength is neutral, I think. But as it moves towards 3 degrees Scorpio, its exaltational strength starts to diminish and diminish and diminish. And so his moon is at 2 degrees 11 Scorpio. So it's only 49 arc minutes from its point of maximum fall. And so that may say a huge amount about Andrew's chart. Now, in Andrew's chart, his moon is in the 5th house. It's the 5th house in Indian astrology is the Purva Punya house. It's Purva Punya representing past life credit, what he brings in, and having the moon in Scorpio nearly at 2 degrees Scorpio in the 5th, what does that say about the credit that he's brought in? And it could be that something rather dark has been brought in from a previous incarnation, if you believe in reincarnation. And that can't entirely be described by the horoscope. I mean, we get hints in the Vedic horoscope. Maybe you have different ideas if you're into Vedic astrology, but I am fairly sure that the moon in the 5th house at 3 degrees Scorpio is significant. And furthermore, he has in his Vedic chart, Cancer rising. Of course, he's got Leo rising Western. He's got Cancer rising Eastern. So the ruler of his ascendant is in the 8th. Is in Scorpio in the 5th house, but it's close to its degree of maximum fall, and so that may say something. That may say something about his morality, and may indeed say a huge amount about it, and what he's coming in with, and why things have been so difficult for him. So I think that moon, that Vedic moon, requires a lot of attention. Going back to his Western chart, I want to continue on the theme of his moon. I think his moon really is important. It's got to be important. Now, when you look at his moon, you might then say, well, his moon is sextile his Venus-Mars conjunction, and that Venus-Mars conjunction has got to be critical, because Venus-Mars conjunction is associated with sexuality, and he is apparently obsessed with sex, or has always been obsessed with sex. All these stories in this book talking about the amount of women that were delivered to him in a hotel room in Thailand, and so on and so on. There is his Venus-Mars conjunction, and everything else in the story is about him being unfaithful to his wife, within the first year of his marriage. And I don't know whether that's true, but the Venus-Mars conjunction may be out of control, and the moon is sextile that Venus-Mars. Now you think, oh, moon sextile Venus-Mars is a good aspect. Maybe the moon sextile Venus-Mars is why many of his former girlfriends have quite positive views about him. But it is sextile. It is sextile. It is moon with moon sextile Venus-Mars. It may not be entirely positive. It may be that the Venus-Mars it's just a connection, that sextile, and it just becomes an important part of who he is, and maybe it's got out of control, and then there is a question of why. And maybe we shouldn't just be looking at Andrew's chart. Maybe we should be looking at another chart, and the first chart we should perhaps be looking at is the chart of his mother. And so there's a chart of his mother. And so one thing about the queen, the former queen, because she's dead now, is that she has an overwhelming Saturn. She has got Saturn on the midheaven, in mutual reception to Mars. So she's got Saturn in Scorpio, in the sign of Mars. Mars in Aquarius, ruler of Aquarius is Saturn. So she's got a Mars-Saturn mutual reception, and she's got Mars square Saturn. And so people have accused the Queen of being sort of tough and unemotional and maybe uncaring and detached. And well, you can certainly see that from from the fact that she's got that Mars-Saturn square, and it says perhaps so much about her success as a monarch. I mean, she's regarded as being successful, even though she's got her critics, and it's all about that Saturn on the midheaven. And so, if you compare her chart with that of her Sun, that means that her Saturn and her Saturn midheaven conjunction is right on his moon. And so that's his first experience, is of his mother, of women, I suppose, and it's completely devastating, you could say. And and his poor moon is being sort of wiped out by his mother's T square. So his mother was born with Neptune conjunct true black moon Lilith, opposition her Mars Jupiter conjunction, and so she's got Jupiter Neptune she's got a close Jupiter Neptune opposition, so that might be all her hopes and ideals, and Mars opposition Neptune. Mars opposition Neptune. What were the mother's desires? I mean, not that I've really watched it, but The Crown talks about the young queen, and that perhaps her desires and her what she was looking for, and it all got smashed by Saturn. So Saturn on the T of that. So she's holding everything together, because she has to be queen, because she has this incredible sense of duty. But there's probably something else that would perhaps wants to get out but couldn't get out, and that Saturn is right on Andrew's moon. And it could be that Saturn on Andrew's moon has totally unhinged him as a child, because first 7 years of life, maybe he picked up on the unspoken side of his mother's personality, with the side she couldn't reveal, but somehow she did reveal it. And of course, he was, the first 9 months of, the first 9 months following his conception, he was there. He was. He was gestating inside the Queen, and so he was picking up on all sorts of levels, what the Queen was like, and so maybe that says something about his moon. And likewise, the Queen had her moon at 12 degrees Leo, right on his ascendant. So perhaps in some twisted way, he became so arrogant and entitled, as the book is, because of that mother's moon. Now, the Queen is traditionally seen as being the opposite. So the Queen is seen as being not having any of that kind of arrogance. It's all about noblesse oblige, isn't it? I mean, and Prince Andrew, from what we hear about him, doesn't seem to have any noblesse oblige. So noblesse oblige, as I understand it, is this idea that you would, if you're royalty, or if you're in an exalted status, perhaps by birth, then that gives you a certain obligation. You have a certain sympathy towards people who are of a lower station than you. And you recognize that relationship, and so nobility gives you a certain magnanimity, and you forgive other people's faults. And Prince Andrew doesn't show any noblesse oblige whatsoever, as far as we know, in terms of what has been reported. So. I think one can argue that the Queen might have messed him up, and that her chart, you can't look at Andrew's chart in isolation. Maybe you shouldn't look at any chart in isolation. Maybe this is a hint that if you want to understand understand someone, you need to look at the chart of their parents as well as the person themselves. And then there are some of the people around Prince Andrew. Okay, we've looked at the Queen, very fundamental relationship there. I mean, I looked at the relationship between him and his father. I didn't find anything especially dramatic. Neptune, I mean, Prince Philip, like his wife, has moon conjunct has moon in Leo, and he's also got Neptune. So Prince Philip's Neptune is on Andrew's ascendant, and the moon as well. So that parental moon in Leo really seems to have been building up his Leo rising, and he's sort of responded to their Leo moons, by developing a particular persona, and in this case it sort of might have been quite an obnoxious persona, and so that's his parents. And then there are people he met sort of later in life. One person he met was Ghislaine Maxwell, and it's been said that she had quite an influence on him, and he invited Ghislaine Maxwell. She would visit the palace. I don't quite know what the relationship was between Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew, but they certainly had a strong connection. And so one thinks, what influence did she have on him? And the amazing thing about Ghislaine Maxwell is that we come back to this moon in Leo. It comes up again and again and again. So just to remind you, Queen Elizabeth II has her moon at 12 degrees Leo. Prince Philip has his moon at 15 degrees Leo. And then we find that Ghislaine Maxwell, she has her moon at 14 degrees Leo. So moon very close to the Queen's moon. Why didn't Prince Andrew marry Ghislaine Maxwell? Maybe that would have just have made things a lot easier. Perhaps they would have been on the same sort of moral wavelength. Although, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell is incredibly bright, so intellectually there might have been a bit of a mismatch there. So there's the moon, and Ghislaine Maxwell's Jupiter is on Prince Andrew's descendant, and so that's stirring things up, isn't it? It really is. And she's offering him things, and then the Saturn. Maybe this is a hint why they didn't get married, why they couldn't get married, why there was a problem. Her Saturn is at 28 degrees Capricorn. So Ghislaine's Maxwell was right on Prince Andrew's Venus-Mars conjunction, and sextile his moon. And there are a number of ways in which that could work. Now, it could be that through Epstein and everything else, that she she messed him up in a big way, and the fact that it's this says so much about his sexuality. It may say something about his own sexual self-concept when he was around Ghislaine Maxwell, but she was certainly having quite powerful impact on him on a sexual level, and also at many different levels. Clearly, this is important. And when we're talking about Prince Andrew's Venus-Mars conjunction, because I think his Venus-Mars conjunction is critical to the whole story, and a lot of the damage to his reputation has been caused by his sex life, and with particular reference to Jeffrey Epstein, but his supposed serial infidelities as well. So why is Venus-Mars being as rampant as it is? And this may just go back to that relationship to perhaps to his mother, and the fact that he, going back to the title of the book, entitled, he felt entitled. And so because of who he was, because of that entitlement of it, there was no limit. Most men with that Venus-Mars conjunction perhaps wouldn't have the opportunities to use that Venus-Mars conjunction in the way that he did, and so that certainly helped sort of undermine his morality. And so when you're talking about Prince Andrew and, why is he supposedly so awful, you have to look, not just at the people around him, but also, of course, at his position in life. So it all comes together. The fact that he was the Queen's favourite son, and you link it all together, and that's probably how you do it. And one final chart to look at is that, of course, of Jeffrey Epstein. And so here's Jeffrey Epstein's chart. Jeffrey Epstein completely links with Prince Andrew's Venus-Mars conjunction. Prince Andrew has a Venus-Mars conjunction. Epstein has a Venus-Mars conjunction. It perhaps doesn't matter that there isn't a connection between the two Venus-Mars conjunctions. Maybe there's not an aspect between them, but Jeffrey Epstein with a Venus-Mars conjunction, he understands the Venus-Mars principle, and perhaps he recognizes the Venus-Mars principle in Prince Andrew and was able to manipulate it, of course, with Ghislaine's help. And of course, she had her Saturn on his Venus-Mars conjunction. And so there's a comparison between the two charts. And so it's what do we see? Well, we see the North Node. We see the North Node and the South Node. So he doesn't have Moon in Leo, Jeffrey Epstein, but he does have the South Node in Leo, quite close to the conjunction of Epstein's ascendant, and that doesn't really help. And finally, one final chart we should look at is the connection between him and his brother. So Charles and Andrew were born around 12 years apart. So there's a quite big age difference between the two. And so they have got Jupiter conjunct Jupiter. So that's interesting, but I don't think that necessarily tells us much about why Andrew has turned out quite how he has turned out. I don't see anything especially pathological about it, but maybe going back to the moon, it's all about the moon, isn't it? I mean, I do think that that's the fundamental issue with Prince Andrew. It's his Scorpio moon and how it relates to other charts, in particular his mother's chart. But Prince Charles has his sun at 22 Scorpio, so Andrew has his moon at 25 Scorpio. So Charles's sun on the moon. Now you'd think that was a good piece of synastry between the two, but it might not be. It might be overwhelming. The fact that Charles is going to be king, he's 12 years older, and the sun just blocks the moon out and sort of causes it perhaps to malfunction. And we shouldn't forget as well that Prince Andrew has Chiron square his moon. So with Chiron square moon, you can go on about feelings of rejection, of being wounded, and Charles doesn't help. And of course, Charles was born with a Sun Chiron conjunction, so his Chiron is on Andrew's moon, and so Charles's presence is not as pathological as the presence of that of his mother in terms of synastry. But I think this just gives you an idea about how one might try to make sense of Andrew's chart. And I wouldn't say that you could just look at Andrew's chart in isolation and say, oh, look, here's a chart of an awful person. I don't think you can say that. I think you've got to look at his background. You've got to look at his opportunities. The fact that he was born to such incredible privilege, and you've got to look at the horoscopes of some of the important people he met over the course of his life. So that's it with Prince Andrew. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.